Well, we are 2 minutes ahead of the schedule, and we'll see if we manage to complete this panel in time. Acoustics in this hall is not stellar, but I hope that some of you will be able to follow either directly or by using the headsets that you have to get better listening. What we will, in 30 minutes, try to focus on is one set of questions. Overhanging a lot of the discussions that we have on Ukraine, here as well as elsewhere, is the old generation of politicians have failed the one way or the other. They have failed to deliver the change that Ukraine has sought through the one revolution or the other. But this panel is going to be another question. Not if the Orange Revolution generation failed, but did the Maidan generation also fail? And in order to reflect on that issue, we have 4 prominent representatives of what we call the young generation, the new generation of politicians in Ukraine here. From my side here, we have Mustafa Naim, member of the parliament. We have Natalie Jaresko, who was, of course, in the government for a while and is now trying to sort out Puerto Rico, I understand. We have Svetlana Salyushuk in parliament as well, and Saya Leshenko, well known since years back, but also a member of parliament. Could I ask, we start with you perhaps. Have you failed since Maidan? Could you have done better?
I will start. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you would like to listen us, you can use your headphones because the acoustic is really awful, and yesterday we did not hear people speaking from the stage. And let me answer on your question. I don't think we fail. It's a long process of transformation, and if we don't have political will on the top level, such transformation takes much longer. Look on Ukrainian reality now. We have totally new experience, which is completely incomparable what was 10, even 5 years ago. So fight against corruption is a mainstream in Ukrainian politics. 5 years ago, you could not imagine such strong anti-corruption investigation conducted by law enforcement agencies and especially by civil society, watchdogs organization, investigative journalists. So this is a new political fashion in Ukraine. I believe it's much better than fashion to steal money. So anti-corruption policy is one of the measures Ukraine produced to be closer to Europe, and I believe in middle-term perspective it will make politics cleaner. What is important that our parliament adopted a number of legislation which will provide more opportunities for politicians to be clean. It's electronic declaration legislation. We are next session we will vote for immunity legislation, and what is important, it's political finance legislation. Since election happened next year, political forces will have money from state budget, even if this party is not present in parliament. So it will make political process more competitive. But of course, I agree that chance of transformation was completely different 5 years ago. And after revolution, we would produce much more progress if Ukraine has strong support on the very top political level. Without such support, process takes much more time, but I cannot agree that Ukraine has not achieved a lot. Ukraine achieved a lot comparing with the neighboring countries. For them it took decades, for us it took 4 years, and I believe next year will be crucial. Either Ukraine takes this road or Ukraine will slide in back on this road of reforms.
Svetlana?
Good afternoon everyone, and bon appetit. I think that new generation shifted the boundaries of the democracy in this country. And I think this is a historical shift. I also think that new generation managed to bury the post-Soviet legacy in this country. Yes, it's still emanating the radiation, but it's not anymore dangerous for lives. I also think that new generation of this country also managed to challenge the backyard policy of Putin towards its neighbors. And it is now the model of the transformation. It's know-how model transformation for other republics on the post-Soviet era. And I think that the role of the new generation was really very high in these processes. Now I'd like to say a couple of more things. What new generation is? Who is the new generation? I think that age does not qualify this new in this term. I think Natalia Yaresko is a new generation. I think Rifat Chubarov is new generation. I think Igor Smilyansky, who came to run Ukrainian post office, is a new generation. Because they came to run this country with the new principles, with the new culture, with the new standards, which differs it from that post-Soviet and authoritarian country. And finally, you know, when you ask what is the failure, how do you measure the failure? What is the measurement? I think one of the measurements would be what we have achieved, what we've done. Today, I can say that we, for example, adopted the legislation on anti-corruption court. Last year, a president of Ukraine here in this room said that only African countries has its anti-corruption courts. And the former Secretary of State told him that, well, the problem is all our courts are anti-corruption. Today, or yesterday, he presented it as the biggest achievement in Ukraine. And I'm proud to say that Mustafa, me, Serhiy, Yehor Sobolev, Oksana Sarid were the authors of that anti-corruption law, the first draft law on anti-corruption. There are many other legislation, like electoral system, which is adopted in the first reading, open public registers for business, access to public information, a new broadcast system, and many other electronic declaration. We played a big role to make these policies real in our country. And I think it's a really big achievement. But also I think that the failure will be judged and should be measured by the quantities of those doors that we will manage to open by the next presidential and parliamentary elections for the newcomers, for the civil society, for people from business, for people from media, to enter the politics and to take the responsibility for further changes.
Thanks. Natalie?
So I'd like to share with you a quote. It's not my original thought, but I agree with it fully. Progress doesn't move in a straight line, and there's a reason why progress hasn't been easy, and why throughout our history, every 2 steps forward seems to sometimes produce 1 step back. He went on to say, more often, it's manufactured by the powerful and privileged who want to keep us divided and keep us angry and cynical because it helps them maintain the status quo and keep their power and keep their privilege. And you happen to be coming of age during one of those moments. This quote came from a speech that President Obama delivered a few weeks ago at the University of Illinois, speaking to the new generation in the United States. I think that my colleagues are absolutely correct. The progress since the revolution has been extraordinary. And the fact that there's disappointment is more a sign of the expectations and the desire for progress than it is a measurement of any failure. I think that this is a time in Ukraine's history where as people continue to grow, engage, and give of themselves and invest, you will see more and more progress. But you cannot deny that the privileged and the powerful are going to fight that. And that's where we are today.
Mustafa, you are on the same line? You got a mic even, yeah?
I don't know what to add to that. First of all, thank you that you gave us privilege to answer for all generation. But I want to ask you, I know that you're eating and it's very difficult to listen to what we say. And that is one of the reasons I want to ask you a question. Let's go to the real things what we have now. For the 27 years in this country, people were sure that politicians are detached, untouchable, they're not sincere, they're not honest. Since Euromaidan, let's recognize it. It was our achievement of new generation that since Euromaidan, actually we have showed that there is other way of making things. Look what you have around yourself now. Remember the previous panel where Prosecutor General asked for new generation to come. All those organized, structured old politicians, old guard asking us to do something, but we are doing now. And this is not about, imitating the old politicians. We are not doing that. We changed that. Today, old politicians imitating us. They want to look like us. They want to copy our methods. They want to be a creative class. They want to say that they are new generation of politicians, which is not true. So we changed that. And the second issue, our actions have already dispelled this crooked mirror of old politicians. We showed that in power there are places for new, honest, decent people. Before that, we didn't trust it can be done. And now, of course, we didn't broken this crooked mirror. It still exists. But people know that there is other options how it can be done, especially in politics. And the last point I want to say you, listen, look what you have around yourself again. All these changes we had these 5 years, who was stayed behind them? All politicians? Just admit that. It was done by young politicians. It was done by civil society. It was done by new generation. And always when we say about young, about new, people think it's about age. It is not about age. It is not about something extraordinary. It's about different mindset. And this different mindset, it's not new, it's normal. It is normal to work for people, to service, and it is normal not to come to this kind of panel like Prosecutor General did, trying to convince people that we don't have corruption, trying to convince people that the biggest achievement of this prosecutor is to fight corruption, which still exists. And corruption is not the only one problem we have. I think that for our generation, biggest problem is that by United Nations research, in 20 years, Ukrainian population will decrease by 8 million people. We should bring back these people back to our country. And if you ask them, who are their future? This is, of course, we are. And we will do that, I think, next year's, and we will do everything to bring them back and vote for us in this country. Thank you.
A perception of Ukraine that you sometimes find abroad is that, yep, fine, now and then, you have in Ukraine an explosion of dissatisfaction, you have an outburst of optimism, an outburst of enthusiasm, and then it goes on for some time, and then it fades somewhat, and the system takes over, and one is back to square zero. I'm not saying it is like that, but that's the perception. But in reality, in politics, of course, as you pointed out, things normally take a long time. There are expectations that you can change everything overnight, which is rarely the case. So it has to be politics with a very high level of determination to move on. And the critical thing is really what happens now. Say that you've had this outburst of enthusiasm and change, has it been too much or too little or whatever, but now you are heading to an election year. And the risk that at least I belong to those who can see is that now it goes back to the old normal game of the old politician playing the usual game for power, reforms fading away, and the risk is that you get a system where enthusiasm is gone and stability of the old sort returns. So what's your, Natalie is shaking her head, so you will have to answer that question. How can you prevent this circle of enthusiasm, and fading energy from being repeated?
I think there is only one way, and elections are helpful and important, but they are not in and of themselves the only or the last solution. Until a system of justice is functioning throughout the country, until law and order is established such that the old financial interests, the vested interests, no longer have the ability to rule, I think that you can't expect more than individual pockets of reform, individual institutional changes that have occurred. But we need to, at the same time as electing new people, at the same time as we're creating these institutional changes, whether they be transparency, whether they be the Leadership Academy, which has opened 6 different installations, trained 500 young people. All of this has to happen simultaneously, but it's not enough unless there's law and order. Because unless there is a repercussion for the old financial vested interests, who are the old politics that you describe, you can't move them out of the way entirely. And so we need to, in my opinion, move forward on all of these paths simultaneously. Supporting that new generation through Aspen Teens, through the Leadership Academy, through Go Global, through all the different elements of moving forward with young people, while at the same time electing people with a new set of principles and values, more and more of them to join the people that are already working, and then law and order and justice to break up the financial interests that are blocking progress.
Svetlana?
Well, answering your question, I'd like to underline that I think that monopoly of the decision taken in the country by just a bunch of people is broken after Euromaidan. And I think it's irreversible process in Ukraine. We have new actors like civil society, like new political forces, like few independent institutions that line up new political culture and new rules in the country. Yes, you are completely right. We have still work on the system of justice, and it's one of the goals, one of the perspectives that we have to work on. We also have to make sure that we have independent constitutional court and central electoral committee, and general prosecutor is no friend of the president, but someone independent who would will to prosecute anyone, despite whatever their names, whatever their positions. But I also see those very strong pillars in Ukrainian politics and society that already is a set up for the new country.
No, let me add some spices, because it sounds like really too much optimistic. I think the risk of revenge is possible. Risk of revenge is here, and revenge is possible. And revenge is not just the day of voting in the end of March next year or in the end of October when parliamentary elections going to happen in 1 year. No, revenge is possible every day. And it takes place every day when people with a corrupt background join politics, when people like Medvedchuk acquire TV channels and they become new political stakeholders in conspiracy with president, when people under investigation avoid prosecution like mayor of Kharkiv, when people who became conspirator of corrupt individuals as a special anti-corruption prosecutor survive and save the position on the top of anti-corruption prosecutor office. So revenge is possible, and it takes every day, it takes time, it takes place every day. But at the same time, resistance of this revenge also on the table. So this is a non-stop fight between values, between generations in the politics. In this sense, I believe it's a crucial moment for Ukrainian democracy next year, when we have 2 parliamentary elections. And much more important, not to find the best president, but to build best institutions. Which institutions that will protect Ukrainian democracy, whoever gonna be president. Look on the United States. So we have president who would like to destroy the order, who would like to build his own miracle world. But institutions in the US block these attempts, and now we see how institutions protect the United States and the whole world from this disaster. We have to build such institutions. And of course, Prosecutor Mueller is a good role model for Ukrainian prosecutor to go and to prosecute bad guys, to put them in jail. So we have to build such institutions in Ukraine, and if we build such institutions, it doesn't matter who's going to be president or prime minister, because these institutions will protect Ukrainian people from attempts of revenge.
I will proceed to be optimistic. I'm sorry. What I would say that when you say that we have disappointment in the old guard who are coming back and Russians, etc., of course we can say that maybe young generation is guilty, but let's name the things how they are. All those revenge and all those party of region and all generation who can come back, it's not our fault, unfortunately. Now it is very fruitful place and fruitful place to fight for our president, for Yulia Tymoshenko, for those people who are trying to show that they are more patriotic. It's not our fight, it's not our fault, but what we promise. I think that the next year will be first serious step for young politicians in presidential campaign and parliament campaign. And I think we will be witness of new level of cooperation in civil society and young politicians. Me and my colleagues, we are now working hardly on that. We cannot say everything what we are planning to do. But if you see around yourself, you see small parties like Demalliance, Sile Ludey, you see the efforts of Slava Vakarchuk and all other people who are trying to accumulate the people's mood to change and these demands for not just in statements, but real political actions. I promise you that the next YES conference will have real results of this cooperation. I hope so, and we do many things for that.
Sounds great. Remains to be seen. One reflection. I've just spent a couple of weeks being more at home in Sweden than I normally am. And that is because we had an election campaign. And I've done X numbers of election campaigns in my life. But I'm always reminded of one thing. And that struck me again during this election campaign. When you leave Stockholm, there's another country out there. And all of the politics that you do in Stockholm isn't necessarily that relevant when you turn up in Halmstad or Uppsala or Gävle or Bollnäs. It's a different perspective there. And that's sometimes a question I ask myself here at the YES conference and listen to you and others. Are we the Kiev bubble? And is the Kiev bubble relevant to what is there in a country that is a very big European country? Take as one odd place, Kherson, which I was a couple of years ago. Very different from Kiev in history, in structure, in population, in whatever. Are people campaigning in Kherson? Do they listen to you? What's the feeling in those places? Because power ultimately will rest not in Kiev, but in Kherson and the relevant places.
Или вы живете в пузыре в этом. 2 дня тому назад я просто вернулась из Донбасса, и я говорила с нашими солдатами на фронте, которые выполняют свою работу, которые сражаются прежде всего они как военные сражаются и сражаются против дезинформации России. Вы знаете, есть люди там и тут, и я думаю, что они ожидают одного и того же. Они ожидают новых правил в стране, они ожидают новой справедливости в стране, чтобы это было одинаково для всех. Один из солдат сказал мне: да, мы знаем, что у вас вот это новое правило, что 5% ВВП тратится на оборону. Но, честно говоря, ему 30 лет, а может и меньше, но он купил сам свою форму за свои деньги, и он не понимает, куда это все деньги идут. И в то же самое мы в Киеве читаем расследование нового времени по публичным закупкам, когда деньги идут куда-то в какие-то кабинеты на Кипре. И я думаю, что есть такое общее ожидание. И вот это новое правило для страны, которые должны быть перенесены на систему судебную. Мы не в пузыре, прежде всего, второе. Это только один шанс для нас, чтобы люди нас услышали, это напрямую с ними говорить. И у нас, к сожалению, нет доступа к олигархическим СМИ, я не могу включить канал и так, чтобы говорить со всеми людьми в стране. Но что мы можем делать? Мы можем проводить реальную коммуникацию. Я бы сказал, что следующий вызов для нас — это не по парламентским выборам. Я надеюсь и я верю, что следующий взрыв молодого поколения будет на местных выборах. И местные выборы приведут других людей, не только молодых, в политику. Я думаю, что теперь власть идет местным советам, мэрам.
With all those people from the regions will be much more powerful than those people who are now in Kiev.
I actually think
that's a good point, really, because I don't think that is properly appreciated by foreign audiences. The importance of the decentralization that has been done here, that the local level is far more important. So that could be very important for getting, I'm not saying the next generation after you necessarily, but for getting a new generation into politics and really getting the executive responsibility out there. That is something that we've seen in other countries but didn't exist here before. No.
In fact, I think that's the real big news story since Maidan, which is community development locally. Community leaders of a new generation, of a new sense of principles. There are programs, the Bukhtan Havralishin Foundation program, the Go Global program. There are programs throughout the nation, and there are leaders who are not sitting here, who are not running for election, who aren't even asking to be publicized, but they are doing incredible work in their communities. They are lifting businesses from 0 to 1,000. They're building innovative businesses. They're building NGOs. They're serving society. They're becoming leaders in fact. Even if they're not running for elections, maybe they are the next local election candidates. And I don't think that, in a sense, and I don't mean to disagree with you, Mustafa, I almost agree with everything you do, but in a sense, we are in a bubble here. Because this is a bubble of a political world, and they're living in a different world, but making enormous change. And frankly speaking, in Ukraine, you know, that's what guarantees that it never goes back. That's what guarantees that there will always be progress. Because from underneath all of this is a whole new generation of thinking.
I agree with Natalia. Sometimes we live in a bubble. It's true, and when you talk to people in regions, they don't ask about Kononenko or they don't ask about public procurement. They ask how to survive for such low pensions and salaries. So poverty is one of the biggest problems in Ukraine, and we should remember about this when we talking about irreversible reforms and so on and so forth, because risk of populism is very high, risk of revenge is very high. From another side, I want to say that there are some topics which unite Ukraine. Anti-corruption topic, it unites Ukraine. If you look on the polls, fight against corruption is important for everybody. Starting from very far east regions, next to the occupied territories, up to the Transcarpathia region. So fight against corruption can unite Ukrainian society. Because everybody wants to have fair government, and everybody wants to enjoy fair government, to have better salaries, and to have better roads, to have better schools, and better hospitals. That is why I believe there are topics not to divide society, but to unite it. And unfortunately, some politicians use topics to divide society in upcoming elections. But I believe, should push topics which can unite Ukraine, and this is a fight against unfair government relations and anti-corruption policy.
Fair enough, fighting corruption and uniting nations. But fighting corruption is, at least on the rhetorical level, motherhood and apple pie, in the sense that everyone says that they're fighting corruption. Whether they're doing it is a somewhat separate business. But you can easily get everyone to go step up.
Можно, чтобы каждый человек боролся с коррупцией, но кто политики,
go out there and say,
могут
we need to increase gas prices. It's essential. We need to get privatization going, really. We need to have private ownership of the land in order to get agriculture going. These are the somewhat more painful decisions that are needed in order to get this country going. And that is politics that goes somewhat beyond motherhood and apple pie, but makes a difference.
I will answer you, who are they? They are sitting here. We are saying about land market for 4 years, and we registered constitutional apply to change that, you know that. The second, about gas prices. We are those who applied to the court saying that please, you cannot rise gas prices until Akhmetov has monopoly in this country. How you can explain people that they should pay more if Akhmetov earns more money on their salaries? And we are saying that we have to rise the gas prices, but immediately we should ruin and demolish this monopoly. We are those people. We are those people who are saying not very, popular things about politicians, about local authorities, and etc. We are doing that. And, the question of this panel, why I don't like it. Always, when Russia says about Ukraine, they say that failed state. Are we failed state? No. The same approach of old guard has to young generation, that they are not united, they are failed, they could do nothing. It is not true. We can do it. Even more, we are able to deliver these results, and we showed it. We showed it in police reform, we showed it in Prozoro, public procurements, in local administrations, local elections. It's achievement of new generation. Please tell me why someone hesitates or has doubts that we will be able to run the country. Just because those old politicians has more money, has more resources or teams. Come on, it's Russian approach to Ukraine, and I don't want to have this approach here in my country. So I think that next election will show that we are not failed, but we want old guard who are corrupt to be failed in our future. We don't want to see them anymore in our country. That's our message.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, we suited against Rotterdam Plus formula, not about gas prices. It's different stories, because in Ukraine we have high-level energy corruption, and we claimed to the court about this, not about gas prices. And what is important, most crucial for next month, is electoral legislation. Because electoral legislation, it is the way how corrupt people and how dirty money go to politics. To prevent this, we have to change electoral legislation. If we don't change it, believe me, next parliament is going to be worse than current one. Why? Because there are more people with more money ready to run, because it's the only way to survive for them. They collect money from corruption during the last 4 years, and they're ready to pay any price just to have immunity and to continue business as usual in next parliament. That is why we have so boring but so important topic as electoral legislation. And we push all our efforts to adopt this legislation next month, because this is a crucial for process of reforms in Ukraine.
Our time is out, more or less, but one final question. If we're going to meet here or somewhere in a year's time, wherever we're going to meet in 1 year, if there's one thing, take one thing that you consider absolutely essential that the political system of Ukraine that you are key parts of deliver by that time, what would that be? And you are not allowed to mention corruption or anti-corruption, because that is motherhood and apple pie. Something else that needs to be delivered, one thing for each of you.
I just mentioned electoral legislation.
Okay.
I think to bring as many as possible new people from civil society, from young political forces, from business to the power, because I believe they will be able to shift this country to the better.
I think it has to be the younger generation participating in the elections and voting, taking charge and taking responsibility for their future.
I think we need trust. We need trust which will allow us to make this very serious step next year. And without trust, we still will have this discussion about old generation and old guard. I don't want to have this discussion anymore. So we need trust next year, and I think we will deliver this result.
And I, the outside observer, would certainly hope that the ideas and the enthusiasm that you still represent after these 4 years, that will have a more decisive impact on the politics of your country in the years to come. Thank you very much. And let me also fulfill my duties by saying that by 15:45, in 30 minutes, you are supposed to be in there to learn more about Nord Stream if you think that is essential, but you are supposed to be there. And you're also supposed to be reminded of the fact that we have the special guest arriving whenever that, 4 o'clock, 1600. So you have some time for further chat and some coffee, and then 15:45 in there. Thanks.